A couple days later, I said to Uncle Axel, "I'm going to run away." He paused in his work and gazed thoughtfully at his saw. "I'd not do that," he advised. "Doesn't usually work very well. Besides," he added after a pause, "where would you run to?" "Well, that's what I wanted to ask you," I explained. He shook his head. "Whatever district you're in, they want to see your normalcy certificate," he told me. "Then they'd know who you are and where you're from." "Not in the fringes," I suggested. He stared at me. "Man alive, you'd not want to go to the fringes. Why, they've got nothing there, not even enough food. Most of them are half starving, that's why they make the raids. No, you'd spend all your time there just trying to keep alive, and lucky if you did." "But there must be other places," I said. "Well, only if you could find a ship that'll take you, and even then..." He shook his head again. "In my experience," he told me, "if you run away from a thing just because you don't like it, you don't like what you find either. Now, running to a thing, that's a different matter. But what would you want to run to? Take it from me, it's a lot better here than it is in most places." "I'm against it, Davy. In a few years' time, when you're a man and can look after yourself, it may be different. I reckon it'd be better to stick it out till then. Much better than have them just catch you and bring you back." There was something in that. I was beginning to learn the meaning of the word humiliation, and did not want any more of it at present. But from what he said, the question of where to go would not be easily solved. It looked as if it would be advisable to learn what one could of the world outside Labrador in preparation. I asked him what it was like. "Godless," he told me. "Very godless indeed." It was the sort of uninformative answer my father would have given. I was disappointed to have it from Uncle Axel, and told him so. "All right, Davy boy, that's fair enough," he said with a grin. "So long as you'll not chatter, I'll tell you something about it." "You mean it's secret?" I asked. "Not quite that," he said. "But when people are used to believing a thing is such and such a way, and the preachers want them to believe that that's the way it is, it's trouble you get, not thanks, for upsetting their ideas. Sailors soon found that out in Rigo, so mostly they only talk about it now to other sailors. If the rest of the people want to think it's nearly all bad lands outside, then let them. It doesn't alter the way it really is, but it does make for peace and quiet. My book says it's all bad lands. Or bad fringes, at least," I told him. "There are other books that don't, but you'll not see them about much, not even in Rigo, let alone in the backwoods here," he said. "And mind you, it doesn't do to believe everything every sailor says either. You're often not sure whether any couple of them are talking about the same place or not, even when they think they are. But when you've seen some of it, you begin to understand that the world's a much queerer place than it looks from Woknuk. So you'll keep it to yourself?" I assured him I would. "All right. Well, it's this way," he began. "To reach the rest of the world, you start by sailing downriver from Rigo until you get to the sea. They say that it's no good sailing on straight ahead, to the east, that is, because either the sea goes on forever, or else it comes to an end suddenly and you sail over the edge. Nobody knows for sure. If you make north and keep along the coast and still keep going along when it turns west and then south, you reach the other side of Labrador. Or if you keep straight on northwards, you come to colder parts where there are a great many islands with not much living on them except birds and sea creatures. To the northeast, they say there is a great land where plants aren't very deviational, and animals and people don't look deviational. But the women are very tall and strong. They rule the country entirely and do all the work. They keep their men in cages until they are about 24 years old, and then eat them. They also eat shipwrecked sailors. But as no one ever seems to have met anyone who has actually been there and escaped, it's difficult to see how that can be known. Still, there it is. No one has ever come back denying it either. The only way I know is south. I've been south 3 times. To get there, you keep the coast to starboard as you leave the river. After a couple 100 miles or so, you come up to the Straits of Noof. As the straits widen out, you keep the coast of Noof to port and call in at Loch for fresh water and provisions too, if the Noof people will let you have any. After that, you bear southeast a while and then south. Pick up the mainland coast again to starboard. When you reach it, you find it is badlands, or at least very bad fringes. There's plenty growing there, but sailing close inshore, you can see that nearly all of it is deviational. There are animals too, and most of them look as if it'd be difficult to classify them as offenses against any known kinds. A day or 2 sail further on, there's plenty of badlands coastline, with no doubt about it. Soon you're following round a big bay and you get to where there are no gaps. It's all badlands. When sailors first saw those parts, they were pretty scared. They felt they were leaving all purity behind and sailing further and further away from God, where He'd not be able to protect them. Everybody knows that if you walk on badlands, you die, and they'd none of them expected to ever see them so close with their own eyes. But what worried them most, and worried the people they talked to when they got back, was to see how things which are against God's laws of nature flourished there, just as if they had a right to. And a shocking sight it must have been at first too. You can see giant, distorted heads of corn growing higher than small trees. In some places there are fungus colonies that you'd take at first sight for big white boulders. You can see succulents like barrels, but as big as small houses, and with spines 10 feet long. There are hundreds of kinds of queer things, and scarcely a normal one among them. It's a kind of jungle of deviations going on for miles and miles. There don't seem to be many animals, but occasionally you catch sight of one, though you'd never be able to name it. There are a fair number of birds, though, seabirds mostly, and once or twice people have seen big things flying in the distance, too far away to make out anything except that the motion didn't look right for birds. It's a weird, evil land, and many a man who sees it suddenly understands what might happen here if it weren't for purity laws and the inspectors. It's bad, but it isn't the worst. Further south still, you begin to find patches where only coarse plants grow, and poorly at that. And soon you come to stretches of coast and land behind it, 20, 30, 40 miles long, where nothing grows. Nothing at all. The whole seaboard is empty, black and harsh and empty. The land behind looks like a huge desert of charcoal. Where there are cliffs, they are sharp-edged with nothing to soften them. There are no fish in the sea there, no weed either, not even slime. And when a ship has sailed there, the barnacles and the fouling on her bottom drop off and leave her hull clean. You don't see any birds. Nothing moves at all except the waves breaking on the black beaches. It is a frightful place. Masters order their ships well out for fear of it, and very relieved the sailors are to keep clear. And yet it can't always have been like that, because there was one ship whose captain was foolhardily enough to sail close inshore. Her crew were able to make out great stone ruins. They were all agreed that they were far too regular to be natural, and they thought they might be the remains of one of the old people's cities. But nobody knows any more about them. Most of the men in that ship wasted away and died, and the rest were never the same afterwards, so no other ship has risked keeping close in. For hundreds of miles the coast goes on being badlands with stretches of the dead black lands. So far, in fact, that the first ship down there gave up and turned about because they thought they would never reach any place where they could water and provision. They came back saying they thought it must go on like that to the ends of the earth. The preachers and the church people were pleased to hear it, for that was very much what they had been teaching, and for a time most people lost interest in exploring. But later on, curiosity revived, and better found ships sailed south again. An observer of one of these, a man called Martha, wrote a journal which he published, something like this. The Black Coasts would appear to be an extreme form of Badlands. Since any close approach to them is likely to be fatal, nothing can be said of them with certainty but that they are entirely barren, and in some regions are known to glow dimly on a dark night. Such study as has been possible at a distance, however, does not confirm the view of the right-wing church party that they are the result of unchecked deviation. There is no evidence whatever that they are a form of sore on the earth's surface destined to spread to all impure regions. Indeed, the contrary appears more likely. That is to say that just as wild country becomes tractable and Badlands country slowly gives way to habitable fringes, so it would seem are the Black Lands contracting within the Badlands. Observation at a necessary distance cannot be detailed, but such as have been made indicate consistently that living forms are in the process, although in the most profane shapes, of encroaching upon the fearsome desolation. That was one of the parts of the journal that got Martha into a lot of trouble with Orthodox people, for it implied that deviations, so far from being a curse, were performing, however slowly, a work of reclamation. Along with a half-dozen more heresies, it landed Martha in court and started agitation for a ban on further exploration. In the middle of all this fuss, however, a ship called Venture, which had long been given up on for lost, came sailing home to Rigo. She was battered and undermanned, her canvas was patched, her mizzen jury rigged, and her condition foul. But she triumphantly claimed the honor of being the first to reach the lands beyond the Black Coasts. She brought back a number of objects, including gold and silver and copper ornaments, and a cargo of spices to prove it. The evidence had to be accepted, but there was a lot of trouble over the spices, for there was no means of telling whether they were deviational or the product of a pure strain. Strict churchgoers refused to touch them for fear they might be tainted. Other people preferred to believe they were the kind of spices referred to in the Bible. Whatever they were, they are profitable enough now for ships to sail south in search of them. The lands down there aren't civilized. Mostly they don't have any sense of sin, so they don't stop deviations. And when they do have a sense of sin, they've got it all mixed up. A lot of them aren't ashamed of mutants. It doesn't seem to worry them when children turn out wrong, provided they're right enough to live and to learn to look after themselves. Other places, though, you'll find deviations who think they are normal. There's one tribe where both men and women are hairless, and they think that hair is the devil's mark. And there's another where they all have white hair and pink eyes. In one place, they don't think you're properly human unless you have webbed fingers and toes. In another, they don't allow any woman who is not multi-breasted to have children. You'll find islands where people are all thick-set, and others where they're thin. There are even said to be some islands where both men and women would be passed as true images if it weren't for some strange deviation that has turned them all completely black. Though even that's easier to believe than the one about a race of deviations that have dwindled to 2 feet high, grown fur and a tail, and taking to living in trees. All the same, it's queerer there than you'd ever credit. Pretty much nearly anything seems possible once you've seen it. It's pretty dangerous in those parts, too. The fish and the other things in the sea are bigger and fiercer than they are here. And when you do go ashore, you never know how local deviations are going to take you. Some places they are friendly. In others they shoot poisoned arrows at you. On one island they throw bombs made of pepper wrapped in leaves, and when it gets in your eyes they charge with spears. You just never know. Sometimes when the people are friendly, you can't understand a thing they're trying to say, and they can't understand you. But more often, if you listen a bit, you'll find that a lot of their words are like our own, but pronounced differently. And you find out some strange, disturbing things. They all have pretty much the same legends of the old people as we have. How they could fly, how they used to build cities that floated on the sea, how any one of them could speak to any other, even hundreds of miles away, and so on. But what's more worrying is that most of them, whether they have 7 fingers or 4 arms or hair all over or 6 breasts or whatever it is that's wrong with them, they think that their type is the true pattern of the old people, and anything different is a deviation. That seems silly at first, but when you find more and more kinds just as convinced of it as we are ourselves, well, you begin to wonder a bit. You start asking yourself, what real evidence have we got about the true image? You find that the Bible doesn't say anything to contradict the people of that time being like us, but on the other hand, it doesn't give any definition of man either. No, the definitions come from Nicholson's Repentances, and he admits that he was writing some generations after tribulation came. So you find yourself wondering whether he knew he was in the true image, or whether he only thought he was. You understand, don't you, Davy, why I've been telling you all of this? I was not sure that I did. Moreover, I was reluctant to admit the flaw in the tidy, familiar orthodoxy I had been taught. I recalled a phrase which I had heard a number of times. "You lost your faith?" I inquired. Uncle Axel snorted and pulled a face. "Preacher's words," he said, and thought for a moment. "I'm telling you," he went on, "that a lot of people say that a thing is so doesn't prove it's so. I'm telling you that nobody really knows what is the true image. They all think they know, just as we think we know. But for all we can prove, the old people themselves may not have been the true image." He turned and looked long and steadily at me again. "So," he said, "how am I, and how is anyone, to be sure that this difference that you and Rosalind have does not make you something nearer to the true image than other people are? Perhaps the old people were the image. Very well then. One of the things they say about them is that they could talk to one another over long distances. Now, we can't do that, but you and Rosalind can. Just think that over, Davy. You two may be nearer to the image than we are."